As the dust settles on the U.S. election, trade frictions between China and the U.S. are becoming more intense. Following the U.S. sanctions on 140 Chinese semiconductor companies, China's Ministry of Commerce also announced a suspension of exports of key minerals such as gallium, germanium, and antimony to the U.S. Now, the U.S. chip giant Nvidia has become the target of China's sanctions. A few days ago, the Beijing Market Supervision Bureau issued a message saying that it decided to launch an investigation into Nvidia because it was suspected of violating the anti-monopoly law. This news caused Nvidia's stock to fall by 2.2%, and its market value evaporated by $88.1 billion overnight. Of course, in addition to the impact of the stock market, Nvidia may also face a fine of up to $5 billion. Obviously, this is undoubtedly a major crisis signal for the global chip giant. It is worth mentioning that Beijing's investigation has also made the U.S. sit still. It is reported that the U.S. House of Representatives drafted a 1,800-page bill overnight, claiming to take action against two Chinese drone companies on the grounds of posing unacceptable national risks. It can be seen that both China and the United States are launching retaliatory strikes, and the gunpowder smell of the trade war has further escalated. So why did China suddenly sanction Nvidia? Will the United States launch a new counterattack next? If you like our video content, please click to subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can receive all our latest video content. Now let's get into today's topic. You may have heard that in 2018, during Trump's term, the United States began to impose an export ban on Chinese chip companies, restricting the export of key components to China. Since then, the chip war between China and the United States has officially begun. However, although this ban seems to suppress Chinese companies, it has inadvertently pressed the accelerator for the development of China's chip industry. For a time, Chinese companies poured into the field of integrated circuits, and their domestic demand for independent innovation in chip technology and solutions increased significantly. According to my investigation, China's chip industry grew by 39% in 2021, and its profit margin also increased by 13%. This means that Chinese chip companies are constantly getting rid of their dependence on external supply chains. Faced with such a situation, the United States realized that suppression could no longer stop the development of China's chip industry, and finally announced the resumption of exports of chips and related equipment to China by companies from various countries. After 2021, the relationship between China and the United States in the chip industry was generally stable, and neither side took particularly fierce or uncontrollable sanctions. However, this balance was broken in November 2024. With Trump winning the U.S. presidential election again, the relationship between China and the United States in the chip field began to become tense again, and it can be said that it was somewhat out of control. In early December this year, the United States announced a new semiconductor export control rule, adding as many as 140 companies related to Chinese semiconductors to the so-called entity list. Among them, 136 are Chinese companies, and another 4 are overseas affiliates. These companies include more than 100 companies engaged in the manufacture of semiconductor equipment and tools. In addition, the United States has further tightened export restrictions on 24 types of semiconductor manufacturing equipment and 3 related software tools. This action has also become the largest scale sanctions imposed by the United States on the Chinese chip industry to date. Interestingly, the day after the United States announced the new regulations against Chinese semiconductors, China immediately fought back. They announced a ban on the export of rare metals such as gallium, germanium, and antimony, which are necessary for chip manufacturing, to the United States, as well as super hard materials and some graphite-related items. At the same time, China also made a harsh statement. Any country, region, organization, or individual that violates relevant regulations may be terminated from all cooperation. The subtext of this sentence is very clear: the world should not think about reselling these rare materials to the United States. I believe that people who understand semiconductor manufacturing know that the importance of gallium, germanium, antimony, and graphite is almost irreplaceable. This comprehensive blockade directly strangles the key lifeline of the U.S. chip industry. And what's more, it also hits the foundation of the U.S. military industry. But do you know? China's counterattack is not over, and the U.S. chip giant Nvidia has become the next target. So, what is going on? A few days ago, the China Market Supervision Bureau announced that it decided to launch an investigation into Nvidia for suspected violations of the anti-monopoly law. After the news came out, Nvidia's stock price immediately fell sharply by 3%, and its market value evaporated by about $88.1 billion overnight. What's more interesting is that large American semiconductor companies such as Intel, AMD, ASML, TSMC, and ARM also generally followed the decline, and even AMD, with the highest decline of nearly 6%. It can be said that China's action not only hit Nvidia itself, but also affected the key companies it cooperated with. After all, Nvidia has a very high share of the global GPU market, and it also firmly occupies the first place in the network interconnection equipment market. In fact, according to China's anti-monopoly law, if Nvidia is ultimately found to have violated the rules, it could face a fine of up to 10% of its sales in the previous year. However, if Nvidia's behavior is deemed particularly serious, the fine could double to 5 times, up to $2 billion to $5 billion. Nvidia's sales last year were $60.9 billion. If China really finds it at the highest standard, $5 billion will undoubtedly have a huge impact on Nvidia's profits. According to Nvidia's latest quarterly report, the United States, Singapore, and China were its main sources of revenue in the third quarter. The United States contributed $14.8 billion in revenue. Singapore contributed $7.7 billion, while mainland China's revenue was $5.4 billion, and Taiwan's revenue was close to $5.2 billion. It can be seen that the importance of the Chinese market to Nvidia is self-evident. So, what is China's real reason for sanctioning Nvidia? According to my investigation, 4 years ago, Nvidia announced the acquisition of Mellanox, a U.S.-listed company, for $6.9 billion. However, due to the large transaction amount and factors such as revenue in China, the acquisition needs to be approved by China's antitrust agency. Therefore, the State Administration for Market Regulation of China required Nvidia and Mellanox to comply with certain conditions before reaching an agreement in order to obtain approval. Specifically, Nvidia and Mellanox were required not to restrict or hinder customers from purchasing or using these products separately when selling Nvidia GPU accelerators and Mellanox high-speed network interconnection devices to the Chinese market. In addition, they must also follow the principle of non-discrimination and continue to supply these devices, related software, and accessories to the Chinese market. Finally, after these conditions were met, Mellanox's acquisition was approved by the 3 major antitrust departments of China, the United States, and the European Union. However, in the trade war launched by the Biden administration, Nvidia complied with the U.S. ban on the one hand, but made huge profits from the Chinese market on the other. As early as 2020, Nvidia announced that it would stop supplying high-end GPUs to the Chinese market and instead switch to more expensive and inferior chips. Obviously, this is contrary to Nvidia's previous commitments, especially the conditions such as not hindering or restricting customers from purchasing or using the above products separately, and non-discrimination principle to continue to supply GPU accelerators to the Chinese market. From this point of view, China's practice of filing a case against Nvidia is completely justified. As for why the antitrust investigation was not launched until 4 years later, it is not difficult to see that this is more like a countermeasure by China to the United States' unilateral export control policy on 140 Chinese companies. But after China filed a case against Nvidia, considering that Nvidia's previous acquisitions had been approved by the antitrust departments of China and the European Union. EU member states also began to launch an antitrust investigation against Nvidia. In particular, the French antitrust agency has announced a formal antitrust investigation against Nvidia. According to financial reports, Nvidia's global revenue for fiscal year 2024 is $60.92 billion, a year-on-year increase of 126%. If Nvidia is ultimately found to have violated France's antitrust laws, the company could face a fine of 10% of its global annual revenue, or about $6.09 billion. The European Commission has already sent questionnaires to Nvidia's competitors and customers to begin collecting further evidence. It is worth noting that after China's sanctions on Nvidia caused a chain reaction, the United States was obviously a little anxious and even launched a crazy retaliation overnight. According to Western media reports, the U.S. House of Representatives drafted an 1,800-page bill on the grounds of posing unacceptable national risks and is ready to vote this week. The core content of this bill is to prohibit Chinese companies DJI and Doudong from selling new drones in the United States. But surprisingly, China's reaction to this matter does not seem to be strong, and media coverage is quite limited, with only one or two media mentioning it. What is going on? Isn't China afraid of sanctions on its drones? In fact, the U.S. sanctions on DJI drones have not been proposed recently. As early as 2016, the United States imposed a series of restrictions on Chinese drone companies. By 2023, 11 U.S. congressmen formed an investigation team, accusing companies such as DJI and Doudong of potentially endangering national security and asking the Biden administration to impose sanctions on Doudong. Then in September this year, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to ban DJI's new drones from operating in the United States. Then, in October, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection banned some DJI drones from entering the United States on the grounds of forced labor. It can be said that the U.S. hostility to Chinese drones has reached the point of using any means necessary, and even began to fabricate various reasons. However, although the United States has launched these sanctions one after another, they have almost been canceled under pressure every time. The reason behind this is very simple. DJI has a dominant position in the U.S. market, with a market share of more than 80%. Take Texas as an example. Almost 91% of police drones are provided by DJI. In addition, DJI's drones are also very popular in the agricultural field. More than 22 million acres of farmland use DJI drones for spraying and monitoring, accounting for more than 70% of the market share. More importantly, DJI not only has an advantage in price, but is also far ahead of its American counterparts in technology, and it is almost impossible to find alternative DJI products. Therefore, although American politicians have many prejudices against Chinese drones, American consumers simply cannot afford to lose DJI. In general, the bill drafted by the U.S. House of Representatives against DJI and Doudong is not worth comparing with China's investigation into Nvidia. The two have completely different effects. So, do you think a new round of trade war between China and the United States will start because of this? To not miss out on our future projects and news updates, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We will continue to provide you with more exciting and interesting content.